welcome council members and everyone, to the first Council of Revenues General Fund meeting for the fiscal year 2025. Okay, the first item is, has there been any communications, Dr. Kobe, to the council?
None.
Okay, so we're gonna give it a minute or so, maybe to see if anyone wants to communicate anything to the council or make any public comment. Dr. Kobe, has anyone raised their hand or sent a message?
No, we are good.
We give it about 15, 20 more seconds to see if someone wants to make any public comment or communicate with the Council of Revenues. Okay, let's move. There's been no communication to the Council of Revenues, no public comment. Next item on the agenda is the minutes of the meeting, August 1st, 2024. Any motions or any comments before we have motions?
I'll move to approve.
Wendell,
Second.
second.
Anyone want to say anything or have any comment about the minutes? Okay, we'll take a vote. Vice Chair Maynard,
Aye.
Dr. Bonham. Okay. Councilmember Hayashi,
Aye.
Councilmember Lee.
Yes.
Okay, Councilmember Asagard Klein,
Aye.
Councilmember Hamasu.
Aye.
Okay. Okay, so the minutes are approved unanimously by the Council of Revenues. Okay, next item on the agenda is, I guess, Dr. Kobe, a review of revenues by the department.
Right. Hi, everybody. I apologize in advance, or I apologize for getting the packets a little late to you guys today. So, with the big changes to revenue, the holiday, and it just was a lot for us. So forgive us if in the future, if we want to avoid things like this, September's always really hard. If we want to avoid things like that, getting the surveys in like a week earlier would avoid problems like we saw today. But again, that is we take responsibility for that. But because we got everything late, I'm going to spend a little more time on the packets, discussing the packets, so you guys have time to explain what's going on. Okay, so to begin with, I wanted to start this conversation with a review of where we ended up last year in fiscal year 2024. So on the right-hand side, you see the preliminary statement for 2024, which is the year end. So we ended at 4%. A couple of things that you will note that you should note is GET was pretty mediocre, pretty essentially flat. Most of the growth became between individual income and corporates. This is because of the change in PTE, the pass-through entities. So high income filers are changing how they file. But if we combine the two, they're up 10.2%. A lot of the growth was boosted by the constitutional refund that occurred in 2023. If we were to have removed the constitutional or added the constitutional refund back into 2023, we would get a general fund growth of 0.6%, right? So something to keep in mind, the actual is 4%. You started off the year at 1.3%, and then you went to 4, and then due to some concerns over collections in May, you guys lowered the forecast to 3.3%. So that's where we are. Do you guys have any questions about that? And
Dr. Cooper, what was the number if you backed out the constitutional refund? What would the general fund growth?
0.6% growth.
It
Very
would go
low.
down?
Yeah.
Oh,
Right here. Can you see my cursor?
no. I can't.
Okay.
Yeah, occasionally.
Okay. Well, it's down here under factors, the third bullet point down.
The lower
It-
left-hand side.
Yeah.
Okay.
And a couple of things I'd like to just point out is the GET was doing okay at the end of the year, at the beginning of the year, and then kind of tapered off. The TAT was struggling, but it started to struggle a little bit more. I'll talk a little bit more about the causes and the changes, or the hypothesis for the change in the second half of the year for those two things, and I'm sure Carl will want to weigh in on that as well. So for the month of July, which is the last month, we have the full preliminary. We're up 3.3%. The GET, the same, seems to be down, but we're buoyed by high individual income tax. A lot of this comes from there seems to be a huge increase in withholdings. I don't have the
August.
I don't have the August final, but I do have the GET for August, and I do have the individual income. And the GET is really strong in August, right? So, last year it came in around 330 million in August. With the Maui fires, now we're above 400 million. For the individual income, we were very high, but then we came down. So it looked like there's actually just some timing differences in the withholding between July and August. And if you average those two out, then we have a couple percent growth going on. The one thing I also wanted to show you with the GET collections is, so this is 2024 and this is 2023. And, at the beginning of the year, we're doing okay. And then we start to lag for the GET. And that seems to be related to Maui. So if you look at the TAT, it's very similar. What happened was the tax collection revenues were actually pretty robust following the Maui fires because of the government assistance. But as that has dried out at the beginning of last calendar year and moving into March, the tourists were expected to come in, and they have not been fully present there, right? So what we're really seeing is the effects of low tourism without the federal stimulus that was coming in. And that's what we're seeing there. Does anybody have any questions so far? That was the collections part. I'm going to move on to the legislation part, because this is where it's going to get a little bit more interesting. So the legislature passed two really large bills this year. The first was HB 2404, or now it's called Act 46. It was the largest tax reduction in income tax in the state's history. And it includes a large increase in the standard deduction over 7 years and increase in tax brackets. And what you'll see is here is the existing law. So we have this is for the standard deduction, 4,400 and 2,200 for single. They doubled it this year, effective this year. And then in 2025, they do some tax bracket shifts, and every other year they do more tax bracket shifts. The bulk of the money,
These are all calendar years, right?
these are all calendar years, yes.
Yeah.
And the bulk of the money comes from the shifts in the tax brackets, right? So we'll see the really large changes in revenues. Once you get up to what you'll also notice is the standard deduction is getting quite large. I mean, this is rivaling what the feds will do. So it's a really big decision on the part of the legislatures to shift the nature of our tax code, right? So we're going from essentially a pretty one of the highest tax states in the country to middle of the road, and sometimes lower for lower income people, even lower than that. The impact is substantial, right? So this is in a boost of several percentage points to everybody, people's income, depending on where you are in the income spectrum. If you're lower on the income spectrum, it is 3 or 4, it can be up to 3 or 4% of your income. So that's a boost of 3 to 4%. And the higher up you go, the less it is as a percent of your income. This is the revenue impact. As you can see, it's quite large. This is different from the official revenue forecast that we have offered people. And the reason is because the administration has taken the decision to adjust the withholding tables for this tax credit so people can receive the tax benefits earlier on. Adjusting the withholding tables beginning January 1st, 2025, that pulls the impact of the tax reduction and the tax credits forward.
Dr. Kobe, why is it effective January 1st, 2025?
Because that's the first year of
Isn't 24 the first year, the effective year?
Yeah, but if you look back on
Not for the tax rates, only for
Yeah,
the
so
standard deduction.
Oh,
the
just for the
standard
standard
deduction was like, it's big, but it's not that significant, right? So the impact of this increase is about $40 million,
Okay.
but the tax rates are hundreds of
Well, it
millions of
doesn't take
dollars.
effect to 2025, the tax. rate.
Yes,
So they're different effective years.
right. So
Okay.
every single January 1st of 2024, we see a doubling of standard deduction.
Mhm.
January 1st of 2025, we see a big adjustment to the tax rates. January 1st, 2026, we see another near doubling of the standard deduction. And then January 1st, 2027 going forward, right? And if you want to talk about the implications on spending habits and incidents of the tax law, we can do that. I'm not going to dwell on this because we're focusing on revenue right now. But what you will see is it is significant. So these impacts include the macroeconomic impact. So we have a rule in the tax research and planning that any legislation over $50 million, we score dynamically, which means we incorporate the macroeconomic impacts of those. This means that when you guys are doing your forecast, you should not incorporate any of the benefits that would, like the macroeconomic gains that would come from a tax reduction in your forecast, because we're doing that for you.
So this table you're showing, it's doing it over 50 million, you're doing a dynamic impact. You're not doing a
Yes.
static impact. Because historically the department did static impacts.
Right.
At least through my, what I know.
Yeah, we made the decision a little while ago 3 or 4 years ago, because we apprehended a economic model that can model big changes in fiscal spending. And so once we had the model, we felt comfortable to do the dynamic scoring. Previously, we didn't have any metric, and so we didn't want to do that by just deciding on what it was. We needed a objective metric to make that decision.
What do you know the difference if it was static?
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
Well, why doesn't it matter?
Well,
because it's not static.
yeah.
No, but I'm asking, what's the actual cost before taking into account the benefits? Because when we do the below the line table, historically we've done it static.
Yeah, well, you're not going to be able to do that anymore because this is what the model says, and the model is different for every single year.
So you're saying going forward, you're going to change the below the line tables to always be dynamic if it's over 50 million?
Correct.
Okay.
And that
But
goes
others-
either way. So if
others will remain static then. The other-
if the legislature decides to raise taxes by over 50 million, we also apply a dynamic scoring.
Okay. But then we have apples to oranges right below the line.
No, we don't, because I'm going to provide you with
We have-
alternative.
Because we have some static and some dynamic.
Nope. I will show you how to fix that.
But you admitted right before this that if it's under 50 million, it's static.
Yeah, but you've already included all of the implications of revenue implications for past laws already. So that's already baked into the numbers.
Okay, but it's done when did it change? When did it change to
So I
static?
think you guys are talking
Mhm.
past each other.
Yeah.
I would say what Kurt is saying is that suppose there was a tax law that only changed taxes by 25 million. So below the line, assuming we still have a below the line, you would have one row that had dynamic changes from Act 46 and one row that would have static changes from Act XYZ. And I think that's what Kurt's saying.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand, historically, the below the line adjustments have been static. So now you're saying if it's over 50 million, Dr. Kobe, you're saying it's going to be dynamic. So that's 50 million per year impact.
Can we revisit this discussion in 3 slides? Because I'm going to go through all of this with numbers in front of us. So I think it'll be a little easier for us to understand.
Okay, because what I'm kind of hearing you say is there's a hybrid going on. You're doing it static if it's up to 50 million, you're doing it dynamic if it's more than 50 million. That's what I'm hearing.
And that
Okay.
makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. So, and the other big piece of legislation is the Act 47, which exempts GET from medical and dental services provided to patients for Medicaid, Medicare, and TRICARE, right? So again, this is over 50 million. So this is applied with the dynamic scoring, and it kicks in, it begins fiscal year 2026.
So that year is static because it's under
Nope.
50? Or
No, they're all.
you're going to do it dynamic because over the long term, it's
Yeah.
over 50 million.
Yeah.
Okay, I see.
Okay. So another thing to just keep in context is we have huge, like really large fiscal transfers over the next couple years due to legislation. The other thing to keep in mind is the hazard pay to public employees is going to go into effect this year. That is estimated to be 537 million. So there will be 2 equal payments, one in October and one in March. If we ran the numbers for you, and there will be a tax gain from that, we estimate that it will be 40 million in 2025. We estimate it will be $40 million in individual income tax and $10 million in GET, so $50 million.
Can I ask a question about that, Seth?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So when you're estimating the impacts of that, I mean, I assume, yeah, you're probably not running that through the model, but are you taking into account the fact that those basically when those hazard pay show up in someone's check, presumably it'll be a separate check, right? It won't be their regular twice a month check. And what tends to happen is the system treats it as if you made that much money every month of the year, and it boosts you into a higher tax bracket automatically. So I'm wondering if you're taking that into account in your estimates of the tax revenue implications.
Okay, so what we assumed was that these taxes were going to be withheld through your normal payments. And we also assumed that since this was going to be, it basically comes in at your effective tax rate, right? So like you have
The
your
tax
average
rate's not
tax rate.
changing.
Yeah. So yeah, like the effective tax rate for most taxpayers, like is something like 6.5%, but actually this is the additional. So we assume some slightly higher, and we assume that whatever your effective tax rate at the thing, that's what it was going to be taxed at.
Dr. Kobe, why is there a GT adjustment, a revenue gain?
Because, when $547 million goes into the economy, some of it will be spent in the fiscal year 2025, and that
So
will
you're
result.
doing, so you're doing it dynamically then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's totally
No,
up to
so-
you to decide
Because
how you want to do
because
this.
if employees get, normally if it's paid to the withholding, that could be exempt, but it depends on what they're being paid for.
No, that's not about the income. It's about the fact that people spent it, right? That's
Yeah,
what
that's what I
the
meant.
debt
That's what I
comes
said.
from.
That's what I
But
said.
if we
Not the money.
do, if
Yeah.
so, like in
Yeah.
our forecast, we've been building in the hazard pay
Yeah.
since it was first announced, and so our income um, jumps in Q4 and in Q1, and so there's no reason for us to do additional adjustments because that's already, once it shows up in income, then in principle it should show up in tax revenues through our normal process.
Yeah, that's kind of what I said. The dynamic impact takes into account the additional money that's going to be spent. That's why there's a GT impact.
Right. So you would do that if you were putting that into a economic model where you were only thinking about income, right? And you would jam that through your thing. This information is for you guys to think about, and if you want to add or adjust your forecast, right? Which is a little different. Okay. I just think like I wanted to spend one slide thinking about all this money is coming in, and we tend to think of fiscal stimuluses in terms of happening at the national level, right? So we use our Econ 101, which all of you guys are fantastic economists, but we usually think of it in terms of what's happening at the national level. And since at the national level, you can engage in deficit spending, right? So you're actually bringing spending from the future to now to boost the economy. And depending on, like your point of view and the fiscal multiplier, you decide how much this is worth. At the state level, we cannot do that, right? We are a balanced budget state. So I think it is important when you think about like, oops, sorry, I apologize. When you're thinking about this, it's Hawaii, like Hawaii government spending is just a function of tax revenues and federal transfers, right? And our GDP is a function of consumption, income, government spending, and exports and imports, right? So if government spending goes down and our income goes up, the net effect should be zero, right? There are potential ways to get around that, and I want to point them out. I don't have a view on any of these, but I just thought it would be useful to think about them as you go forward and are engaged in this debate. It's possible that the government, if you give it to consumers, they spend it faster than the government, so they could spend it more quickly in this year. Another issue is like right now we've been putting a lot of money away in the rainy day fund that is not being spent, that is diverted to the future, right? So in that case, you would expect that consumption would rise faster than there would be a net gain to GDP. On the medium term, you could assume that there's effective migration, right? So you're slowing the decision of people basically to leave the islands. That would have some tax impacts. If that's true, that would have a positive effect. Over the long term, you could think that the citizens make more productive investments than government. You could, I don't know if that's true. Or conversely, you could say like the lack of investment in public infrastructure is going to harm our long-term growth impacts. Those long terms tend to probably fall outside of our budgetary window. But I just wanted to, and you guys may have other things to add, but I just wanted to give you guys something to think about, right? We're not engaged in this is not a Keynesian. These decisions that occurred at fiscal policy are not Keynesian decisions, right? In their traditional sense, we're deciding to take less from the government so people can have it, but like it's not going to lead to a big increase in GDP because we're not bringing spending and tax revenue from the future and spending it now. That's my little Econ 101 lecture. Do you guys have any questions or comments about that? I mean, Carl.
There are, I mean, there's 25 other tweaks to that short list of what could go wrong or could go right, and but in the sense that the state government has effectively been collecting more than it spends on an annual basis now for quite a while,
Okay.
which is partly reflected in $1 billion rainy day fund, but there's also the other special funds where money gets stashed, and so essentially the state has been pulling this money out of the economy, and they're essentially going to stop doing that,
Okay.
right? And so in that sense, in the very near term, this could be a net positive, right? Because it's not that the state government is suddenly going to stop spending the normal money that it would have spent anyway. It's just that it's not going to be stashing things away for future spends. And then one other quick comment is, well, couple. I'm a little skeptical of the possibility of any boost in migration. That's a research project, right? I think we'll find out. But there's some other things that aren't in here. Is that to the extent that households are able to keep more of their of what they earn, that increases the incentive to work, and particularly on the single mothers, heads of households, lower income households, the changing tax structure could help to boost. And this is actually one of the things we've done in our model is we've boosted our labor force just a tiny amount. But given how anemic our population is and how anemic our labor force is, those have the potential to be important. And then one final thing, and then I'll shut up. So one of the challenges with this is that the tax implications are across the entire income distribution, and I'm willing to argue that there's probably no one on this call who's going to rush out and spend that tax cut right away. Instead, it's going to end up in your brokerage account or somewhere else. And so, to the extent that consumers aren't consuming it, instead they're holding it in using it to buy assets and invest, it will have very little impact on the local economy. I mean, unless they're using it to invest in local business or something like that. And so the lower end of the income distribution is almost certainly going to increase their spending, and that will show up in the very short run.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Dr. Kobe, what was the policy behind the tax code? Wasn't it to put more money into people's pockets to deal with inflation and other rising costs?
Yeah, I don't want to speak for the legislatures who passed this, but that is what I heard in the media, and that's what I heard when they said.
I mean, I agree with Dr. Bonham that the higher end, they may not spend it as in terms of the percentage of additional money they get. They may not spend a lot of it. They may put it in, invest it or save it. But for the middle class and the lower income, I would think a lot of it would be spent into the economy.
So
Right.
this is how you normally get with a balanced budget. This is how you would normally get a negative effect from a tax cut. Is that so? You cut taxes, and the government cuts spending 100% to match the tax cut, right? And then that money flows to households, but they only consume a fraction of that increase in their income. And I mean, the people at the bottom of the income distribution spend all of it, but people as you move up the income distribution, they spend a smaller and smaller fraction. So on net, consumption goes up less than government goes down. So under a completely balanced budget, and then not allowing for any of these other sort of productivity enhancers or other incentive effects, you would end up with a net negative for the overall economy.
Right.
And I think that's likely, as you get out into years 3 and 4, and you're past the point where the state has sort of reduced the amount that they were overtaxing the economy and sticking into rainy day funds, you'll start to see those negatives, I think, a little bit further out, not so much in this fiscal year.
Right.
When did it at what level do they not benefit from the rate cuts or the widening of the brackets? Is it about 400,000 or is it higher for?
Everybody
Goes on
benefits.
forever.
Yeah,
Oh, so
everybody
they
benefits.
benefit from the run up in the lower,
Yeah.
the stretching
Mhm.
out. Okay, I see what.
When you mess with the lower income tax brackets, everybody
Yeah.
gets that benefit, right?
Okay.
And so in public finance, they like people live and die by this propensity to consume and like at different income levels. It's and a lot of our models and what we are making decisions on depend on that, right?
Mm.
Yeah.
And there's all these things of like how people respond with their budget. If people view this as a temporary thing, they're more likely to save it. If they think this is really going to last, then people over 3 or 4 years will actually tend to expand their budgetary or spending
They're spending.
habits.
Yeah.
So there's so many different variables in all of this. It's very hard to know, but I think and thanks Carl for adding in the additional ones, but I just think it's like helpful to at least think about the mechanisms in which we're going to debate what's happening here in the economy.
So there's no like surcharge where the higher income becomes subject to basically like a flat 11%.
Not yet.
Okay.
Wait a few years.
Because I know, like, I've seen that, like, in the federal estate tax area many years ago. There was like a surcharge, so it would be, when they have too much assets, it becomes like a flat rate across the board.
Right.
Could I ask a quick question just to Carl or to Seth, whatever? So, you're talking about the rainy day funds and that, sucking money away in the rainy day funds. And I'm not really familiar with the past ebbs and flow of the rainy day funds. I mean, other than just reading what was in the media and stuff. But so how is this all going to impact the decisions that are made about what to put in the rainy day fund? And how do you think that might flow through the economy in terms of investing in capital, things like that? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
Yeah, okay. So just are you assuming that the rainy day fund makes capital investments
No,
in
I'm just
Hawaii?
saying, no, I'm just saying what do you think in your view would be an impact on how decisions are made, what goes into the rainy day fund or what to use it for, knowing that
So
this is-
Yeah,
I can
less will
I
go
can
into the
jump in.
rainy day fund. Yeah.
Yeah.
They
And
have
it
less
was
money.
going to be, that was going to be the case anyway, because
Yeah.
I mean, the rainy day fund is I think it's over $1 billion right now.
Yeah.
I
Right.
think it's at as high as it ever
Record
has
high.
been. I mean, they replenished it after the pandemic, and I don't think there's a lot of appetite for adding more to it. And
Right.
certainly with these tax cuts, there will not be. And so essentially, to make all this pencil out, the state government spending, I mean, actual spending needs to remain relatively flat for the
Mhm.
next decade, and that's sort of the plans. And so, some of the reason the state has the ability to do this, as I said, was because they were collecting too much, but also the way the budget process works. It's state government, right? And so it's a little convoluted. So essentially, we budget every year for filling vacant positions that never get filled.
Mhm.
And so if you think about it, you might say, well, gosh, that does, if you don't budget for that anymore, it doesn't really save you any money because you never filled the positions. But what happens is every year, so let's say you budget $100,000, salary and fringe for 10 workers, and then none of them get hired. Or at the end of the year, the department says, well, gosh, I couldn't fill these positions. I couldn't find anybody, but I really need a bunch of trucks. And so some of the money ends up getting spent, right? And so one of the plans is to quit pretending like we're going to fill these vacant positions, or one of the ways of thinking about this, because the labor force isn't there anyway, right? And to be more strategic and think about filling really crucial positions, and that by in and of itself means that lapses of spending or lapses of budgeted funds will get smaller and smaller, and that helps with this process, along with the fact that we were over collecting in the first place. But there's risk here for sure. I mean, if we had if instead of, what's our forecast this year, 4.8 or something, if we ended up at 3.8 or 3, that would mean the out years get really hard, right? Because the further out you go, the tax cuts get bigger and bigger, and the carryovers get smaller if we have a bad year. So there's definitely risk here, but it's also it's also not written in stone, right? These things will change if the economic situation changes, and they might take money out. So let me try and shorten this up, but so one of the implications of the rainy day fund, certainly the way the legislature thinks of it, and the reason they wanted to replenish it, is they think of it as a essentially an insurance policy, if you will, for bond rating agencies. They want to make, they think if they lower the amount that's in the rainy day fund, or if they don't replenish it, that they're going to get nicked on the bond ratings, and then it will have real costs, right? If our bond rating goes down and our borrowing costs go up.
Right. And if you study the fiscal budget, there were transfers to the rainy day fund, which go away, but there was also accumulating fiscal surplus that was getting larger and larger and larger every single
Right.
year. And that's basically what that's what they decided to remit in the form of tax reform. I will say, like, basically our revenues were 30% higher compared to COVID. This is something that happened in every single state, and different
Yeah.
states are dealing with this in different ways. But the fun thing for you guys is you guys have got to figure out how that truly affects revenues, right? And so that's why I
Well,
wanted
but
to.
we've got to start with the economy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's why I wanted to get to this. So this is my suggestion on how you guys do this. We know our revenue estimates, which are HB 2404 and 1035. You take your forecast, which has always been a top or bottom of the line forecast, right? So that included all of the past legislation that was in there. And you just do the math and figure out what the appropriate rates are. I did it for you guys here, right? So this is your forecast for May. I added 3.5 to 231. I made the assumption that you guys were going to just extend this one more year. These are the expected fiscal impacts of the tax cut bill. These are the expected impacts of the GET bill. These are the new adjusted revenue things, and this would be the forecasted growth. I provided you guys with calculators, right? So that allows you to say, oh, wait, I don't really think that this should be 4.8%. I really think it should be 3.5, and you put it in there and you make the adjustment, it'll hit it out. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to allow you guys to give you the power to like understand what's going on top of the line and what's going on the bottom line, because ultimately what the state is concerned with and what we usually have to do is, whether it's us or you guys, we have to provide a bottom of the line forecast. And so you'll see this in your booklets, right? So this is table 1. Again, this is your current forecast, right? Same numbers here. We do the adjustment. This is the numbers that I just showed you. The reason we also did this is your mean forecast, but traditionally when we do the mean forecast, this is a bottom of, we take your top, like you take all your indicators, you give us we make a top of the line, and then we subtract out all the legislation. So this number, 2.8% after your model thing, is more comparable to 2.3%, which is after the adjustment, than to 4.8%. Does that make sense?
No.
Okay.
So I think what you're saying is that normally when you do a council mean forecast, it's a below the line forecast.
Right.
And so you're backing the adjustments in and then taking them back out or something like that?
Yeah, we usually get it, like this is how we do it, right? So your forecasts are we use your indicators, and our models produced a 6% forecast for 2.5. We make some adjustments. This is mainly due to the mass transit fund and some allocations. So we really get 5.3% if there was no legislative changes this year. We're adding to like these two more and we get 2.8%, right? So this is how we normally do it. normally we don't have any legislation that's larger than 50 million. It's incredibly rare, right? And so it just never occurred to like the bottom of really top of the line and bottom line forecasts were essentially within your margin of error, which is 0.5%. Now they're larger, so you guys have to decide how you want to do that. I'm trying to provide as many tools so you guys can make the decisions that you want to and understand how all the interest rate, the percentages work. Now, one thing I'd like to like point out is like if you would have told me just intuitively that like we were going to see massive reductions in revenue through this tax cut and we would still have percentage growth
Positive
increase,
growth.
it kind of stretched my mind a little bit, right? But that's because every year we're lowering and lowering the denominator. So this is meant to like kind of help with, it's just hard to do math intuitively on a call with 7 people. So I hope, I wanted to give you as many tools as possible. Do you have any questions about that or walk you through the calculator? Anything like
Dr.
that?
Kobe, you know, over the current year, don't we expect some volatility from the pass-through entity tax?
The pass-through entity tax should be revenue neutral for me, for the state of Hawaii, because we are not lowering anybody's state income tax liability. We are they're just prepaying it so they can afford the federal level, right? And so what we expect is individual income tax collections will go down a little bit, but corporate income tax will go up commensurately.
Because I think, I don't know, I'd like to hear Councilmember Lee's comments, but I think over the remaining months, we may have people paying at the entity level, but they've already paid some of it at the individual level or at the partner level or S-Corp level, S-Corp shareholder level. But then when we get into the beginning of next calendar year, then they're going to adjust it. So I would think over the current fiscal year, it kind of balances out. But we're going to see a bump up, I think, in the remaining months of the current calendar year. Because they're going to
You're
have to make
absolutely
the,
right, Chairman.
yeah, they're
The
going to have to
pass-through,
make the third and fourth quarter plus some catch-up payments if they want to take the deduction for the 2024 year.
yeah,
But then they'll adjust
we're
it, make sure.
you're absolutely right. The pass-through entity is a pull for a forecaster's nightmare, right? Because there's going to be volatility. We don't know where everything is. People are paying. So this is another complication that you guys will have to consider.
Yeah,
going
it just
forward.
means that we need to ignore the
The
September
month-to-month
numbers,
month-to-month
volatility.
variations,
October,
right? We need to
yeah.
pick a dang forecast and stick to it. It's actually not that uncommon. I'm pretty sure if we went back and looked, and I know that tax department has, but from my hundreds of years of personal experience with this, my sense is that at the beginning of the fiscal year, our forecasts often are end up being more accurate than that's too strong. But we often move the forecast around during the fiscal year as the incoming data is noisy. And then at the end of the fiscal year, we sort of get right back to where we started. And so I guess the key is to not get swayed by the month-to-month noise.
Councilmember Lee, do you have any comments about
I
that?
agree with you. There was a lot of confusion early on, and everybody waited the last minute to do the election, so they probably prepaid on the individual side, and now they're catching up on the corporate side. But at the end of the day, they'll get their refunds on the individual side and the deduction there. It should kind of clean out in the wash. I'm struggling looking at all this data. I was kind of looking forward to this meeting, knowing that SET would provide the changes to the legislature, the change in the law. But I feel a lot more comfortable now with the fact that if the adjustments have been made already, and we try to stick with what our growth rate that we initially planned, and then just stick it to the calculator like Seth did. And see what that comes out. too, then I feel like we're gonna be at the same place. And so I feel comfortable, like Carl was saying, yeah, we kind of mess around with this right now with all this uncertainty out there. I think at the end of the day, we're going to get to the same numbers that was our guess from the beginning, was our, not total guess, but our
Let's hope.
adjusted for the
Informed
spending.
guess.
Yeah, informed guess. And you can put all the economics to it of what people are going to spending, what they're going to be saving. I think at the end of the day, the legislature is going to spend just as much as they have been. We're going to see. My take is that a majority of the people who will receive larger refunds in the future or get those tax dollars will spend it, and it will circulate in the economy.
Yeah, I agree with you, Councilmember Lee. I think
Yeah, only rich people like you, Kurt, will just
no,
say
not me,
invest
but
it, and,
but I think it's it was really good policy of the administration and the legislature to pass the tax relief.
Well, we were over collecting, I think is.
Yeah, and I think people would also, with costs have risen a lot for food and for gas, so I think people need it. But that's
that was
what-
the justifications that they
Yeah.
gave. But I mean, frankly, you didn't need a justification for. I still don't understand why they didn't just index the tax brackets. But essentially, we've been doing a backdoor tax increase every year for the last, for as long as we've been collecting taxes, and it's just the right thing to do.
Yep. I teach that in my tax class, the backdoor tax. Boy.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, anything else about Dr. Kobe's presentation?
I would just, the whole, hazard pay totals are huge, yeah. So I can see how that would, it's kind of, how we underestimated the impact of the COVID relief, when all of that money came flooding into the state. I mean, this will be a similar sort of impact to our local economy. Interesting.
And if you guys, so that's the end of my presentation. If you would like me to keep up this calculator to facilitate discussion, I can. If you do not want to, I will just shut it down and I will allow everybody to look at your beautiful faces.
Okay. Yeah, I think for now, but we may ask you to put it back up.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So anyone want to start off the conversation for the next item, the current fiscal year's revenue estimate?
Okay, I'll just talk. So, Seth, can you put up table 3?
Yes. Did I have that
this
in my
is the
presentation?
Forecast of key economic indicators. I mean, I can just talk about it if everybody can find it in their slide deck.
This is from the booklet, right?
This is from the booklet. It's page 5 of the booklet. And I usually like to start here because I like to compare the council's mean forecast with how I see the world, and ask whether, because, well, I'll just jump right in. So the council's mean forecast for visitor expenditures for fiscal year 25. And let me just point out that the fiscal year row headers are wrong, right? So the first column of the fiscal years is 25. This goes from fiscal year 25 to fiscal year 2031, just like the title of table 3 shows. So fiscal year 25, the council's mean forecast for visitor spending is minus 0.04. Now that's possible, but I don't believe it because, and I know what people are doing. I mean, they're looking at current year visitor spending, but everything from August forward is now being compared with post wildfire. And it's important to recognize that when you're looking at the statewide visitor spending numbers, if you take Maui out, if you look at year to date, so January through July, and you take Maui out, visitor spending is up 6%. Most people don't realize that because they're looking at the statewide aggregate. It's all about Maui. So, 99% of the weakness in the visitor industry is about Maui. And where it's not about Maui, so where you see, say, a decline in visitors to Kauai, for example, I would argue that some of what you're seeing there is actually the end of the substitution, right? So visitors substituted other islands in the initial immediate aftermath of the fire, and that's sort of unwinding. But if you look at average daily census, you take Maui out, it's flat. So all the other islands are holding up. They're not declining; they're just flat.
We're flat.
Visitor spending net of Maui is up 6%. If you look at July visitor spending net of Maui, that's up 12%. If you look the average daily census net of Maui for July, it's up 3%. And then if you look at the August passenger count for the whole state, it's up 6%, right? And that includes Maui, right? Because now we're getting into the bounce back period. So essentially, Maui visitor arrivals and spending fell about 50% in August, September of last year. And then in the early fall, it recovered about 25% of that. And then since that time, it's just been totally flat, right? So visitor arrivals to Maui we're very, very flat, get a little bit of a bounce in July. But now we're on a year over year comparison. That 25% down for Maui is gone, right? We're now going to be seeing numbers in the 20+% range for growth rates for the rest of the year. So you can't get to it. Well, that's too strong. I just don't believe the 0% fiscal year for visitor spending, or even the weak numbers for visitor arrivals.
So you're basically saying August, September was very low for Maui. So the base period we're comparing it to from those 2 months was very low last fiscal year. August gets reflected right in September.
Basically, all of last fiscal year, or the second half of last fiscal year, was incredibly low, and going forward, that's not going to affect us on a growth rate basis. And on top of that, the rest of the state held up just fine. In other words, visitors didn't just rush away from the state in 2023 and the first half of 2024. They rushed away from Maui, and everywhere else was relatively stable.
Because August activity gets reflected in the September 20th general excise and TAT returns.
So the other thing that has happened, and I mean, part of the reason that Maui didn't see more visitor recovery, say in 2024, was because the hotels were all full of residents. They were full of residents and employees of FEMA and Army Corps of Engineers and whoever else was on island working. But that's not true anymore. And if you look at the hotel occupancy rates on Maui, so basically, right after the fire, they dropped, and then they came right back up to about where they were pre-fire, around 65, mid to high 60% range. And they stayed that way all the way until roughly May of this year. And in the June, July data, they tailed off pretty sharply. And so I think we're about to see the visitor industry of Maui and the state beginning to fill those rooms again. And so, right, I mean, there wasn't any reason to do an advertising campaign when your hotel was half full of residents and workers, right? But that's changed. And so I think I'm actually concerned that our forecast might end up being too pessimistic for the second half of 2024. Well, the fall and into the winter because of what I expect is going to be a big push in terms of promotions, right? And 4 nights get the 5th night free, good room and air deals. So all I'm saying is that as a whole, there's a couple of reasons I think that the council's mean forecast that we would maybe plug into the calculator is maybe on the low side. The usual one that I've been ranting on for a couple of years now is construction activity. I think is going to be stronger than what the council is forecasting. We are at record levels of construction jobs, and that's just a reflection of that activity that isn't going to go away in the rest of this fiscal year. And then the other one is I'm really not sure how the council mean for CPI came in at only 3.4%. That would suggest that council members think that the inflation number is going to come down pretty hard. But the cause of the inflation in the Honolulu CPI is all about shelter. If you take the shelter component out of the Honolulu CPI, it's only up 1.8%. And the shelter component isn't going to go away. The inflation rates are going to come down, but they're not going to come down very fast. There's a whole nother story about whether that data is real or not, whether it should be causing our tax revenue forecast to go up. I'm a little skeptical of it, but anyway, though, if we were to raise the visitor spending forecast, or raise the visitor arrival forecast, or raise the CPI forecast, or raise the construction forecast, then we would get a number closer to what I think the model spits out a number for me for fiscal 25 of 6.7%, which was a little shocking.
Wow.
I'm not suggesting we would go that high, but I don't think that what's coming out of the council mean is quite high enough.
Dr. Bonham, you said the tourism visitor count has been strong to date. Do you expect that to continue through the last 10 months of the fiscal year?
Yeah, we basically have so in our forecast, what's happening is U.S. visitor arrivals are growing through the rest of this forecast period, and a big chunk of that is the recovery on Maui that hasn't progressed as you might have hoped. Right, we're still down on Maui roughly 25%. So we don't think that's going to remain true. We think that there will be ongoing recovery on Maui, and actually, as I said, it could accelerate. And then, even though the Japanese visitor arrivals are relatively anemic, they're a good 10 percentage points below where we thought they would have been by this point. They're around a 50% recovery, and we were. Go back a couple of years, we were forecasting a 65% recovery, but we think that we will be on a continued recovery path for Japanese visitors as well. And you think back a few meetings ago, first we were kind of excited about rate cuts, then we were kind of depressed because we didn't get them, and now we should all be excited that they're coming and hopeful that they're not too late. But the direction of movement of interest rates, both in the U.S. And throughout the rest of the world, with the exception of Japan, bodes well for some continued strengthening of the yen that hopefully doesn't destroy the Japanese economy, but at least in terms of spending power, I think that will continue to benefit the Japanese recovery.
Carl, with regard to your model, does that reflect the adjustments that Seth is showing below the line? Because Seth, correct me if I'm wrong, it was a forecast 6%, and then you make the adjustments to get us down to that 2.8?
Correct.
Yeah, so I'm just talking about what comes out of my version of table 6, right? Which is what
Okay.
I think that's what Seth had showed.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. So, yeah. So my above the line number is massive.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that yours is reflecting that. So that's why and yeah, the argument you're making doesn't make sense.
Yeah, the
'cause,
6.7 is below the line for,
Okay.
yeah, so that's fascinating. And well, it shows you the difference between a 0% visitor spending growth, and I think my visitor spending growth is, I believe it's 2%. See if I can. No, my visitor expenditure growth is 5%. And that's because I'm multiple things, but some of it is inflation, which our inflation forecast for the fiscal year is 4.6%, and which is not that far from where we are year to date. And then it's also just that recovery on Maui, right? Comparing to a period when we were down 25% on Maui and not having that all go away, but still have it be a net positive.
And just as a reminder, we do have on table 8 shows the sensitivity of the model to visitor spending that you can look at.
The last fiscal year, we had estimated 4.8, but we came in at 4%.
Last fiscal year, you estimated at
3.3.
3.3.
Or 3.3, and then we came in at 4.
We started the forecast cycle at 3.3. We went up to 4, I think, and then we brought it back down to 3.3 at the end of the fiscal year, and then it came in at 4. I think I got that right.
Because I'm looking at table 1. So table 1 is, oh, you adjusted it for actual set at 4.
The forecasts were 1.3% last September, 4% in January, 4% in March, and 3.3 in May.
Okay. Thank you.
Carl, could I ask you to just go back to construction just for a little bit? Because you mentioned that as, of course, that's one of the big ticket items too. And you thought that the mean percentage change there is actually lower than what you would put in, but by what kind of magnitudes here? At least do you think the trend over the, so here we have 9.29 for 25, 7.53 for 26. How much,
it's mostly in the current fiscal year. Actually, the out years almost exactly match the forecast that we have. It's really just the current. So our forecast for the current fiscal year is 5 percentage points higher.
Oh, it's that higher, double digits.
Yeah, which probably explains a lot about. The combination of our forecast is 14.75% growth for the current fiscal year, and then our visitor spending forecast is almost 5 percentage points higher. So those together are going to give you a huge difference. So the council mean forecast is, what is it? 4.8? Is that what comes out of table 1?
Overall.
Oh no, that's the May 29. What is the table 1 council mean? Okay, model.
What is it?
What am I looking for?
Yeah, it's not listed in this one, yeah.
Should be chart 1 model and table 5A. Is that? No, that's from May 29. Seth, where is our forecast?
Your forecast is on
It's not table 1.
Yeah, it's table 1.
Is it the bottom?
Table
The bottom
1.
line is our forecast?
No, your official forecast is 4.8, 4.5, 4.0, 3.5, 3.5.
But that's the May 29 forecast.
Yeah.
The question is,
based
where
on
is
our
the
input factors?
forecast from this council mean inputs?
Yeah,
At the very bottom,
okay.
the model 1, 2.8%, 4.7%, 4.7%, 3.9.
No. Oh, okay, I see.
Because that's
I
with
see.
the
That's without the
adjustments.
adjustments.
That's with the adjustments,
With the adjustments.
right? Without the
Okay.
adjustments, they would be 6. Without the adjustments, the mean forecast is 6%.
Is there a table that shows those?
Yes, it's
Table 6, I believe.
yeah, table 6.
There we go. Yeah.
Results of model 1, yeah.
Oh, so see that I'm not that extreme. My forecast was 10% and the council's is 6. So I was just sharing that perspective to ward off the inevitable desire to cut the forecast.
So, but just real quick, Carl, just back to the construction thing.
Yeah.
So if you're saying your construction completed was like 14 3/4, you said, and then I'm just looking the year out after that for 2026, our mean was 7.53. Is that still under what you predicted?
Mine was 7.4
okay, so
in
that's pretty
2026
close.
and 4.3 in 2027.
Okay, so it was just really
you're-
25 that was different.
The
Yeah.
current year is much higher, you're saying.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, take it for what it is. It's a forecast. The way that we're and there's a lot of manipulation of the data to inputs into our model particularly because of the way the government contracts data comes in. It's very, very lumpy. And the lumpiness, doesn't show up in the same way in the tax collections because the lumpiness is about the contracts, not about the work.
Councilmember Hamasu, do you have any comments about the potential rate cuts coming up in the future?
Well, based on what I've heard, I'm totally confused as to what the forecast going forward will be based on this calculator that Seth sent us. In terms of interest rates, real estate's always been interest rate sensitive. So I'm saying that we're all optimistic about what's going to happen. But in terms of CPI for Hawaii, I think we've already seen is very sticky as or lumpy or sticky, whatever Carl said it was. But yeah, I'm trying to keep up with everybody, but I feel like I'm in 2nd grade right now. I'm trying to learn from behind. So I think maybe better ask somebody else. I'm
Second
still,
grade is a good place to be.
Yes.
Good finger paint.
Vice Chair, do you have any comments and thoughts?
I think that was a question for Christy.
Was
Yes,
that
Vice
me?
Chair.
Sorry,
Yes,
Yeah.
sorry. Thank you.
because you're in the finance and
Yes, I
spending side.
I understand some of your thoughts, Carl, especially the recovery from the August numbers being such a recovery from when you look year over year, because we did see that dramatic drop in things
Yeah.
in Maui. I always hesitate to be as optimistic as you are. It must be a wonderful place to be, Carl. But I do have some concerns that the year to date, only through July. It's very surprising to see visitors spending down whatever it is over 5%, and that is not taking into account inflation. So if you inflation adjust that, it's even larger. So that certainly is a concern of mine. But I can see where you're coming from as far as we're going year over year against a very soft market with what was happening in Maui. I think total visitors still are not up to where we were pre-pandemic. So there's still a ways to go there. Overall, I'm just getting a sense of the overall economy. I think it is starting to feel like the economy is slowing down. The FOMC meets on the 18th of September, and because of the economy the economic slowdown, or it's not a recession yet. We haven't actually seen negative growth, but certainly there's a feeling that the risk now is more to that, rather to employment rather than inflation, and expectation certainly is a cut in the meeting on the 18th, and as well as cuts going farther, you know, in the future at subsequent meetings. And to Mike's point, certainly real estate is dramatically affected by interest rates. So the real estate market has been incredibly slow the last couple of years. So that's maybe a bright point. But the I was just looking at job numbers. I mean, we're still down year over year. We're down from where we were the year before, and we haven't come back to pre-pandemic numbers. We've still seen outflow of the population. So I think there's room for not being too aggressive in our forecast going forward. And certainly there is a risk that we're real optimistic and things turn around, and the budget has been set at perhaps a level that is higher than is justified. So I tend to be on the prudent side, as you know, but I don't have a good feeling, Carl, to your point on the very, very high construction numbers. Just from a lender standpoint, we haven't seen a lot of lending either on the construction side. So I'm not, the public spending is, of course, something different. And that even though it's using up money from whatever fund, it is getting money into the economy too. And to the other point, the hazard pay, that's going to be putting lots of dollars into people's pockets. But I am cautious, a little bit cautious, given the spending, visitor spending, and the lack of job growth. I think when I looked at the last,
The jobs are up 0.5% year to date. Just FYI, statewide, including Maui.
well,
So
maybe year to date, but year over year, July, a total job count for the state was 631,000, and in July 2024 is 627,900. And then you go back to July 2019, pre-pandemic, we were at 650,000. So
well, you can't compare jobs to pre-pandemic. I mean, you can, but they don't really mean anything because the labor force is down 20,000 people. Right. So I mean, the unemployment rate is back to where it was roughly pre-pandemic. It's 3%, not exactly the same. So
yeah.
But I take your point. So the July year over year is negative.
Yeah, the July year over year is negative. Yeah. So I'm a little cautious. I'm a little cautious.
So when you, so we've just gone through a process of benchmarking the jobs data because I mean, as you all know from the political hoopla. So wait a minute, I don't know how you're getting a year over year negative for July. That's not what, maybe you're looking, maybe that's the non-seasonally adjusted data.
It is,
yeah.
Carl. But I'm looking July and July. So
no, the non-seasonally adjusted data is still up. So I don't, year over year is up 0.6% in July.
Well, for the statewide, I'm showing, well, this is off the dashboard, this
from who?
Dashboard. But I'm showing July 2023, non-seasonally adjusted, 631,400. And July 2024, 627,900. So
yeah, that number's wrong. It's 635,100, straight from the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
This is the right off of DBED's website.
Yeah, it's wrong. So anyway, I mean, I don't disagree that there's some reason for caution. But all the visitor numbers are all looking at a period that had, roughly a 25% drop in Maui, and the year-over-year comparison is going to change completely. It's in fact, it's already changing. As I mentioned, if you look at the August passenger count year over year, it's up 6%, right? So and that's the third of that was pre-fire. So going forward, the year over year numbers on total statewide visitors, barring a recession or barring some other catastrophe, they're going to be a lot higher than what we've got in our model. So I'll move that we adopt 5% above the line. For the current fiscal year, just to keep the conversation moving.
Councilmember Hayashi, do you have any thoughts and comments?
I agree with Carl on the visitor statistics. I think our forecast is low, primarily because we are coming off a low, and we still haven't seen any rebound yet from the Japan travel yet. And I know part of that is, with the yen being, so weak compared to the dollar, but Japan is making moves on the finance side to try to prop up the yen. So in my forecast, I was figuring that we're going to see some of that starting to come back starting, next year sometime. As far as construction goes, I think there is going to be an increase. I'm not sure if it's going to be as high as Carl's identifying, primarily because, working for an engineering firm, we're busy and we're actually turning down work. And I think there's a lot of that going around. So as far as trying to get things completed, I think that's going to be the challenge as far as labor force goes in the construction industry. That being said, I know DPP is moving to, at least here in Honolulu, is moving to help speed things up because Bill 6 is moving forward for the self-certification to try to, speed up the permitting process. So, that may help some of the construction as well. But I think the gating item is going to be the labor force as far as the contractors to actually build all this stuff. So that's why I guess that was going to be one of my questions for Carl was, does your 14% factor in the potential issues associated with the labor force on the construction side?
I mean, obviously, Scott, that's a huge concern, right? I mean, we're already at record numbers of construction workers. Honestly, I don't know where we're going to find the workers to. So that I think it is going to slow down. Things will be slower than we would like because you just flat out don't have and costs will be higher, right? Yeah. So the subcontractors and the contractors will be bidding with a recognition that they've got to bid in. They've got to take into account the risk that they're not going to be able to find the workers, and they're going to have to pay higher rates and even bring people in from the continent. So I mean, we try to take it into account. Take our large number with a grain of salt. People are extremely busy already.
So that's why I mean I think our forecast is a little conservative. Is 5 the right number? I think it's closer to what it is. And I whether it's 4.5, 5, I think I'd probably be comfortable in that neighborhood.
So is that before the legislative change, Councilmember Hayashi?
No, that'd be after. So that would be, bottom line, because we're at 2.8. So I think, we'd be closer to 4.5 or 5. Just because I do agree, I think our visitor numbers are too low, and looking at the impacts that Seth has shown, I mean, that's a big mover, and with regard to where the numbers end up.
So
So,
just
you know,
a point of
go ahead.
clarification, Carl, was your 5% above the line or below the line?
Honestly, I don't know what's called what anymore, but if you look at the table that Seth has online, the 5% he's got plugged in is what I had in mind,
As the council.
right? I mean, the council
Yeah.
mean, what does the council mean for that cell?
6.
Six.
Or if you adjust for the mass transit fund, it's 5.2.
3.
Okay, well, my
5.3.
intention was not to lower the council mean.
5.3.
I withdraw my motion
So
because
Scott,
I thought the 4.8 that was in there before was the council mean.
No, that's the current
That's the current forecast.
That's the May 29th forecast. So if we would put the council mean, it's what is it? It's
So if I can adjust my motion, then I'll just say, let's go with the council mean forecast.
Which is
Again.
what number? What,
I'll put it in the council mean forecast.
6%.
That's
Well, it's-
before the 2 adjustment?
Yeah, so the real here's what the council after the adjusting for the mass transit fund transfer.
Cause that would be 5.3, yeah?
Mhm.
3, yeah. And Scott,
Just round it to 6.
Scott, what were you proposing to put in and where? Which
Oh,
step?
so I was thinking at the bottom because I was thinking the 2.8 is too low, and I thought that's where Carl was going. That he thought that our number at the bottom should be closer to 5.
Maybe we should color code them. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
I think, yeah. Seth was trying to make it easier for us. We're just
the
as
blue line.
confused.
Sorry.
No,
So
that
it
to me
should be
seems
5.
fine.
5.3. 8.4.
So my preference is just to focus on what I guess we'll call it the blue box, the above the line, because that's really, that's something that I think we know something about, is the likely economic path, or at least we're trying to know something about it.
Yeah, I agree to discuss it in terms of that, and then let's see what falls out after the changes.
And that 5.3 that Seth has in E4 is coming from a 6%, basically an economic growth driven tax revenue change
Right.
before all the changes,
Mhm.
which is that's a pretty strong,
That's pretty
right?
strong.
That reflects the bounce back, right? That at least I'm expecting.
Yeah, but
I mean, we all
I'm
are.
hoping for. I'm hoping for.
even though it had the lower visitor expenditures and the whatever calculated the 6.0 had the lower visitors expenditures in there, you still think it's okay?
No, I think it should be higher, but I guess
But you're okay
I'm
with that.
compromising.
I mean, I guess one thing that kind of strikes me, and I don't really know how to account for it so much, is because Carl, about the CPI and about how shelter is such a huge component of that, and I don't really know how to account for that or how going forward. That's something that always sits in the back of my mind, but
It's interesting because so I would say if you were just looking at the CPI and you recognize that it's the history that we have so far, which is, I guess that's through May, probably, we might have the June data, to 1.8% if you take out shelter. Okay, so shelter is basically rent of primary residence, so actual rents, and then owner's equivalent rent. And owner's equivalent rent has absolutely nothing to do with the economy. It doesn't. I mean, if your neighbor's rent goes up and you own your house, you don't change your behavior at all, right? So I would just ignore that. But I don't believe the shelter number in the first place. I don't think it makes much sense. And so in other words, I don't think it reflects that the price of all other goods are going up, and therefore we're going to get tax revenue increases, right? That's not what's going on. But I guarantee you that the unions are negotiating around the headline number, right? They're not splitting hairs over whether the shelter data is reasonable or not, and the headline number is close to 5%. And so, when the nurses go on strike, and when the hotels are on strike, and when the contractors are or the carpenters and others are in negotiations right now, they're targeting that 5% number just to be whole. And so in that sense, I think it's going to drive up wages and tax revenues.
Dr. Kubi, that $240 million number, that's a dynamic number or a static number?
Dynamic.
Dynamic. Because the increase in the standard deduction, isn't that going to impact more of the middle class and lower income taxpayers?
Yeah, so the way this tax cut is structured, it does benefit the people who are going to see the biggest increases in their relative incomes are low and medium income households.
And they're more likely to spend their money, right?
Right.
As opposed to the higher income people.
Right.
So if we have a 5.3 above the line, it would be adjusted to 2.8.
Correct.
I'm happy to entertain a higher above the line.
Yeah, I would think, Carl, I'm with you. Seth, if you put in 6.3, if we increase that, that to me,
Or
and
7.
I don't know,
Um,
that just seems too high to me, tell you the truth. Yeah,
because then that gets us to closer to 3.5-4% bottom line number, which is where I was thinking, Carl, you were trying to get to, and I agree. I think the impact on the visitor right now, where we are with the visitor numbers being basically flat, that I think that is fairly conservative. That in comparison also with the CPI component that Carl mentioned. So increasing.
Carl, how did your model account for all the federal spending, or the reconstruction spending? Was it in your model, or are we?
So
Because supposedly
it's a back of
replaced
the envelope
Yeah.
input into the model, right? So you're talking about the rebuild on Maui.
Right. So like basically, because we actually had a bunch of tourists, we just didn't call them visitors, right?
Yeah.
Kind of, right?
Yeah. So actually, so a bunch of is in our data, right? It's in the tax revenue collections that we saw last year. That flow of spend that went to cleanup, for example. So the interesting thing is that's not showing up in the government contracts, to the best of my. I don't think any of that's showing up in government contracts, right? It's not being these contracts aren't being let by NAFAC, so they're not showing up. I don't really know exactly how. I guess that's because those are federal. I don't really know why, but you don't see. I don't think you're going to see a big contract for, say, Goodfellow Brothers to do, debris removal or whatever it is in any of the data that we have. So a lot of it's missing, but where it does show up is it shows up in the job counts, right? And it shows up in the labor income. So, and we have the labor income through first quarter of the year, and we have the job counts through July. And then going forward, we're in that government contracts component, and in the overall construction, we're adding in something on the order of, I can't remember if it's something near $1 billion a year in spending as a very crude estimate of rebuild costs on Maui, and then going forward, some of that will start to come from settlement, assuming the settlement gets through the Supreme Court. So there's a whole another pool of resources, a flow of money, and that could start as early as, could it start this fiscal year? It maybe, certainly next fiscal year, if that settlement gets approved, and that would be, a lot of that money would be used to do things like rebuild houses in Lahaina.
Well, I guess my question was, how did you guys account for all the local residents staying in hotels and the FEMA contractors staying in hotels and that impact on TAT? And
Let's see. The way that happened, well, one, now it's in the data, right? So, but before that, we were doing adjustments to our visitor spend and occupancy rate, and essentially backing out the fact that the occupancy rate was higher than it would be if you only took into account tourists, and backing out the estimate of visitors, not visitor spend, non-visitor hotel spend, if you will. But we've stopped doing that because it's really not a piece of what's going on right now.
I'd like to remind people that looking at the June data, for the full year, GE, which is the broad-based tax, right, was only up 0.9% for June 2020.
But that's what you should expect.
And the transit accommodation tax was down 5.2%. So it was, we're coming from a very soft spot.
Which is why the growth rate for this year will be even higher. I mean, really, that reflects a year where, from August, I mean, really almost the entire fiscal year, we were down 20 to 30%, 25 to 35% of Maui visitor spend, and the visitor spending on Maui is at a substantially higher rate than it is throughout the rest of the state. And so we should have, I mean, it's actually surprising that excise tax wasn't even worse.
It's general excise tax, it's been below inflation, right? Is it the last year or last 18 months? But Dr. Kobe, do you have any data on like spending on, like more big capital items like cars, appliances?
I certainly do not, but maybe Dr. Bonham does.
No, I don't.
Because I know
not that I know of.
Before the Great Recession, that really slowed down in 2008 and 9.
Well, one of the things you got to remember with that is everybody made their purchases right after COVID. So you would expect that to slow down a little bit because like you can only buy so many dishwashers and
But you're saying there was an artificial spike.
well, I don't know if it was real, but we don't consider, I wouldn't consider it like the trend to like continue, right? It was a bump.
I think that I saw a recent article on Hawaii auto sales that they anticipate actually sideward to slow movement only because interest rates still remain fairly high in terms of borrowing for new cars. So people are actually holding on to their cars longer now before considering purchasing a new one. I had a question. I know you kind of touched it a little bit in terms of the billions of dollars for the settlement process and the billions of dollars being spent by the insurance companies. Are those all incorporated into the GET tax, or is that not part of the calculations?
We do not. So again, our model is based on your indicators, right? So if your indicators included that big boost, that would be represented in our model, right? But we are not going to include this because this is based on your economic forecast.
So Seth, with regard to that though, I think I was planning for a little bit of that, but that has not actually been approved, right? Because isn't there one insurance company still holding out? So that settlement has not been officially approved, so it's not going forward, and they're threatening a lawsuit, right?
Yeah,
I thought.
mean, I don't know how that money will be spent, but
So
So-
since it's not an official act, should we be including it? I guess that's my question.
No.
Okay.
I mean, past practices. I mean, if it was legislation that was proposed, we would not make any adjustments until it's passed. But back to the excise tax issue. So, for example, in our forecast, we built in the hazard pay. So that means my income forecast is boosted in Q4 and in Q1, and so then because my income forecast is higher, then that would show up in what comes out of the DOE tax models in terms of excise tax collections. But in terms of the settlement payments, I would be, I don't know, this is a question for the tax accountants, but I don't think there's going to be any excise tax applied to the payment of the settlement, right? But the spending of the money would, of course, be subject to excise tax. And so these, an insurance payout that then someone uses to start construction on a single family rebuild in Lahaina obviously is going to generate excise tax revenue. And the last I looked, I think it was data through July. I'll throw these numbers. I'm pretty sure I got the numbers right. There were about 40 single family home permits that had been issued for the Lahaina burn area, or they were wildfire permits basically. And I think I remember, we don't get the permit applications. We only have the permit issuance. But I had heard from I think it was probably from the mayor, that there were another 80 or so permit applications that had been applied for. So we're just at the beginning of that, and I think we're going to see those accelerate. I'm pretty sure I saw on the news the other day that the Army Corps had announced that they were done clearing lots in Lahaina.
Vice Chair, do you have a proposed number, either above the line or below the line?
Well, I am just a little more concerned. I just feel like the economy is slowing down.
Yeah.
And if it is, then we're gonna have fewer, it's gonna impact Hawaii too. So I would propose a lower number. I liked Carl's first stab at 5% versus 6.3. But
That was a mistake.
But yeah, we can come to a compromise, I'm sure.
Christy, I think I'm sympathetic that we talked a little bit about the U.S. economy slowing down, and clearly it is slowing down. But it's also proven to be amazingly resilient, right? I mean, we just got an upward revision of the second quarter GDP number. I realize that is backward looking. Tomorrow will be a very interesting day. That's the jobs report.
Yes. Yes.
How about 7%, Christy?
What? You're going the wrong direction, Carl.
6.5.
How about 5.5?
Do I hear 6?
Well, I like 6 because looking at the sensitivity analysis that Seth provided, 2 percentage points on visitor arrival increases, the number by about 0.8. So from 5.3 to about 6, would assume that that the visitor arrivals were off a little bit, and we'd be seeing about a 2% increase for the coming year.
So 6 would take us to a below the line number of 3.5. Is that what I'm seeing?
And I'm kind of in agreement with Scott, and I am kind of leaning towards what Christy says, to be a little more conservative on this, because there are sectors of the economy that, other than maybe tourism and construction, that are, suffering, in regards to the labor shortages and so forth. So I'm willing to go 6.1 as as a compromise between a high and a low number, but
Hmm.
tendency to want to be a little more conservative.
Let's stick to whole numbers.
Well, I'll make a
It's either
motion.
6 or 7, so I guess it's 6.
I'll make a motion that we go with
Yeah, I'll
6%.
withdraw mine.
Okay,
And that's just for 2025.
that's just for 20.
Okay.
We have a lot more discussion to go.
Yes.
I'll second that.
Okay, so the motion that's been made and seconded is the above the line would be 6%. Any further discussion for fiscal year 2025? Okay, we'll take a vote if there's no further discussion. Vice Chair? Maynard? Dr. Bonham?
Aye.
Councilmember Hayashi?
Aye.
Councilmember Lee?
Yes,
Councilmember Asagad Klim?
Aye.
Councilmember Hamasu?
Aye.
So the vote is 6% above the line or 3.5, I guess, below the line. Carries unanimously for fiscal year 2025. Okay, next item on the agenda is fiscal 2026.
So can I just confirm something though, really quickly? Sorry. So that 6% there that we're saying above what was the 5.3 originally that came in table 6, right? So it's not the 6 point. Everybody's good with that one, right?
The
So that's-
6% flat, yeah.
Got
And
it.
but I guess the official council forecast will be the 3.5 because we project the below the line number.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Ooh, so next fiscal year 2026. Dr. Bonham, you want to share your thoughts about the next fiscal year?
Mostly I'm wondering, why does it go to 8.4? What is going on in our mean forecast that has revenues rising next fiscal year?
Is it lowering
Has
the
anybody
base?
figured that one out?
No.
No,
Is there it's not an adjustment, right?
Because
No, it's above it's the unadjusted total growth rate is at 8.4%.
Great.
because
For both, yeah.
I
Yeah,
think
why
it's
is
a
that?
mistake.
Both before the adjustment and after the adjustment for.
Yeah.
Carl, you dropped construction in fiscal 2026, right?
Well,
Or
yeah,
for-
yeah. So those numbers reflect the council mean and the council mean construction numbers. So I'm just looking. There's nothing.
There was no change for 26 or 27, and then just a difference between the two for the other out years, right?
Yeah, because the council,
Yeah, I don't see it.
yeah, council generally drops its most of the economic
The
factors.
only number that goes up from fiscal 25 to 26 in table 3 is real GDP. Goes up from 1.2 to 1.9. Remember the column headers are off by a year in table 3. All the other growth rates are, well, that's not true. The visitor arrivals goes from 0.2 to 2.8. And visitor spending goes from 0 to 1.9. See, we should have adopted the 8.4 for this fiscal year. Sorry.
Just to let you guys know, visitor arrivals drives our models way more than visitor expenditures. So that's probably it.
But which model is this for? Is this the mean forecast? Because I was looking at the summary that was sent out for model 1. And that is showing the mean at 4.7.
That's below the line, and the top of the line, which is the blue, is 8.4.
Yeah, but isn't the discussion why it's 8.4
Right.
after?
Yeah.
And then
And I think the reason it's 8.4 is because in the council mean inputs, right, we boosted visitor spending, visitor arrivals by over 2.5% from fiscal 25 to fiscal 26 because our fiscal 25 forecast was too low.
How does it take it to 8.4 if we only go to from negative 4 to less than positive 2?
Because the visitor arrivals has a huge parameter in the model, right? You go from 0 to 2.5, and if the parameter on that is bigger than 1, let's say it's 2, then it's boosting your GDP growth rate forecast by more than 1 for 1.
But 8.4 is over the GDP forecast, right?
Yeah, it's doing what I was saying we should do for this fiscal year, which is basically recognizing that there's a bounce back, right? The mean forecast has its bounce back in fiscal 26. And when you have a bounce back of activity, you get these kinds of surges in tax revenue growth. I don't know if you get that big of a surge, but you get a surge.
Does seem a bit high.
But since we really didn't change this fiscal year much at all, I mean, if we believe our inputs, then the number for next fiscal year ought to be right, or it ought to be in the ballpark, I should say.
Well, but Carl, if the thought was that there was going to be a bounce back, then aren't we having kind of because if the bounce back is happening in 2025 but it's being reflected in 2026, and that's going to inflate the number, wouldn't it?
Oh yeah. The 8.4 is too high if the bounce back is actually happening in fiscal 25.
Mhm.
Of course, we constrain the bounce back in fiscal 25 out of concern about everything, right? And so the question is, does that mean that the bounce back didn't happen in fiscal 25, or we're just being really conservative?
Well, I don't think it'll happen twice. So I think we had.
No, it won't happen. It's unlikely to happen twice.
Yeah, we had I mean, having the growth at 6% is a bounce back, and may not be as much of a bounce back as what you would prefer, Carl, but that is a bounce back from a kind of a from
negative to
very
0.
low, from a very, very low number, growth number.
So Carl, what's the anticipated UHERO forecast for 2026? And anybody know what the DBID forecast is for 2026?
For what metric? You mean like?
Well, tourism arrivals, or actually anything related to expenditures from a tourism and resident perspective.
So our fiscal year forecast for arrivals in 25 was 4.5%. And our fiscal year forecast for 26 is 2%. And then trailing off to 1% by the end of the decade.
Yeah, another way you could do it, Carl, is if you think your model for the general fund growth revenue is UHERO's model is pretty similar, you could look at the absolute number for fiscal year 2026 and figure out what percentage equates to that absolute number, and then you pick the percentage if that's what you wanted to do, because that incorporates your bump, right?
Yeah, when you have larger swings, looking at absolute numbers is helpful.
The question is, do I even have that number stored somewhere? Because if I reran the model right now, I would get different results because we've already changed our forecast. I know, I get what you're saying. I mean, look,
on your
basically the
results
council.
model of your in the individual results model, shouldn't it give you like it should give you an absolute number for your model for fiscal year
I see.
2026.
I see what you're saying. I thought you were talking about. Yeah, I get it. Um, it's this one. I don't know, which line do I look at? The unadjusted total.
I would look for the line that says total special fund allocation. Right below that, it has a percentage.
Total special fund allocation. Oh, I see.
It's the same. It's essentially the same number, but
And so, what are we looking for? You want to know?
your absolute number.
Yeah, it's 11,354,000,000.
So 11.54 billion. So let's see. Oh, that's even, that's like 9%.
Yeah.
Seth, can I ask you a question in table
Yeah,
6?
I didn't think that would help.
The differences between the initial growth rate that's calculated and then after the total special fund allocation in 26 and 27, it remains static, but there is changes, and they seem to be somewhat significant, similar to 2025. So shouldn't that number the 8.4 and 6.1, shouldn't that be lower? Or
Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, that's the same question that I had, because then conversely, starting in 28, 29, and it's actually above, but so it doesn't seem to make any.
Oh, but the reason why this is weird is because it's the growth on the previous year, right? So you get the
oh, I see. Okay,
that's why it's weird. You were not subtracting
I see.
from the
Okay,
top.
Okay. Oh, so that's why I was confused too. Yeah.
okay.
Okay.
So the bottom line is that essentially the council's forecast for fiscal 25 has implicitly assumed that the bounce back, whatever it's worth, happens in fiscal 25. And so we can't get another bounce back. We're not going to get 2 bounce backs. We might get surprised to the upside in fiscal 26, but it's not because there's sort of a second bounce back from the wildfires. And so the growth rate has to come down. It can't be the 8.4, because the 8.4 was, or 8.9 or whatever the number was based on a more anemic assumption in fiscal 25.
So, Dr. Bonham, what kind of number are you looking at above the line for fiscal 2026?
Want to leave it the same? At 6%?
At 8.4?
No, 6%, Carl.
Well, I certainly wouldn't lower it from 6% because I think 6% is too low to start with. But
I made the last motion.
so look, if you were already, if let's say that fiscal 25, actually, I'll take that back a little bit. I mean, I think if you're, it depends on how we're characterizing what we're assuming about fiscal 25. If what we're doing is we're just being conservative, or let's say, let's put it a different way. Suppose we think the U.S. economy is going to weaken a lot in the next 6 months. So then the reason the fiscal 25 doesn't come in higher, despite the fact that we're making this comparison to fiscal 24, which was really bad, right? Given the wildfires. And then we sort of get another mediocre year because the global economy isn't so great and the Fed was too late to cut rates. Well, then that means fiscal 26 could get another bounce back, right? Because it never happened. So I'm not sure that we necessarily need to keep it at 6 because of that original logic. I think you could go higher than that. I'm not talking about 8.4. And then the other way to think about it is so if you think about fiscal 25 as having sort of completed the readjustment post fires, suppose then what would you expect from just sort of normal economic activity with, say, a 4% inflation rate or whatever the number is, and a 2% real growth rate. Remember, the real growth rates will be higher for the next several fiscal years because of continued rebuilding activity. And so, I mean, my forecast for fiscal 26 is not 4% inflation; it's 2.6% inflation, and 2.5% real GDP growth. So, that would argue if you were thinking you've completed all your sort of post-fire adjustment in fiscal 25, then that would argue for a number closer to 6% for fiscal 26. I know I'm all over the map here, but that's because this is kind of crazy.
Yeah, I would feel comfortable with that.
I was wondering, because when I was doing these projections, I was anticipating that, optimistically that interest rates would actually decline even further over the next, not only in 2025 fiscal year, but 2026 fiscal year, and that tourism would return back to some level of stabilization, start to grow again. So wouldn't that support, as well as the spending on rebuilding Maui, wouldn't all that kind of help flow into fiscal year 2026? Because you figured fiscal year 2025 ends in June of next year. So the growth could happen towards the later part of 2025 into 2026.
Yeah, certainly if let's say the U.S. economy ends up weakening a lot more over we get a lousy jobs report and we get much bigger interest rate cuts. I'm not in the camp that we're going to see 100 basis points of interest rate cuts this year, like some, but let's say we get more rapid interest rate cuts and potentially a much bigger appreciation of the yen. You could see a bounce just because of Japanese recovery that works its way all the way into fiscal 26.
And of course, nobody said anything about the election.
Yeah.
I think
So
if the Fed does drop dramatically, it will be because they see a lot of trouble.
Mhm.
So
No, yeah, I agree. That's why I don't think that's the most likely scenario, but hopefully that's not the most likely scenario.
hopefully,
I think the
Good
numbers
here.
are coming out the way it is because that bounce is going to happen in these 2 fiscal periods.
Across the 2 fiscal periods.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
if you look at the numbers and you look at the models, we're all like, wow, 8 is huge, but okay, so let's say that's too large for all of us to gulp down. And 6 is same as 2025. And I'm not trying to look at the adjusted numbers, just from the blue box numbers, that if we take that this recovery or bounce back is happening over 2 periods, just because you got interest rates, you got construction has to ramp up, it kind of makes sense that it can be at both years could be at 6%, and then the model shows that it starts to drop in 2027 and gets in 2028 gets to a more normal inflation rate. So it kind of makes sense to me.
I think that was a useful way of describing it. So if you looked at the results in table 6, on page 11, we have 6% in fiscal 25 and 8.4 in fiscal 26. And so if you averaged them, you'd have 7.2 in each year.
Yeah, and I think that's where you were coming with the 7 to begin with, and I get that, but everybody has to be on board with that, and so
Yeah.
I believe the 6 probably is a 7, but the 6 is probably what we're more comfortable with.
Yeah. So the question is the fiscal 26 a 7, and the 6.5 is what we're comfortable with, or is it 7 and we're comfortable with 7?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the economy, to have inflation plus GDP higher than 6, I think would be interesting.
That would be a surprise.
Yeah,
Carl, what you were saying, what in inflation and GDP was 2.5 and 2.6?
Yeah,
For
I mean, in our
fiscal
forecast
26.
for the fiscal year, but remember
26.
that's because we had a big bounce in the current fiscal year.
So you had a
Um,
bigger bounce in the current fiscal year.
Yeah. So I mean, for us, real GDP plus inflation in 2025 is 6.6, and in 2026 it's 5. So our GDP, so we have a bigger GDP bounce in the out in 26 and 27, and then inflation coming down. So it's 6.5 or 6. What did I say? 6.5, 6.6 in 25, and then roughly 5.1 in 26.
So 5.1 you have in 26, fiscal
Yeah.
26. But you had a higher base in fiscal 25.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So how about 6.5 in 26?
I don't know. 6 is such a nice round number.
Yeah, I did advocate for round numbers, didn't I?
Yeah,
Mhm.
you did.
Yes.
Since unfortunately the 0.5% is budget dust when you take into account our lack of crystalness in the ball.
Mhm.
This has been the toughest one. I thought COVID was hard.
Well, we got COVID really
COVID
wrong,
was-
so
Yeah.
that's not very
Oh,
funny.
we
But
went wrong. We went
gotta
wrong in a
laugh.
really bad way.
Oh,
You guys did the best that you could.
Yeah.
You did.
I'm good with 6.
Any other comments about fiscal 2026? So do we have a motion for fiscal 2026?
I'll move 6% for fiscal year 2026.
And that's above the line, right, Councilmember Lee?
Above the line, yes.
Yeah, okay.
The blue
Any-
box.
Okay,
And I'll second.
okay. Any more discussion on fiscal 2026? Okay, we'll take a vote then. Vice Chair Maynard,
Aye.
Dr. Bonham,
Aye.
Councilmember Hayashi,
Aye.
Councilmember Lee,
I
Councilmember Ostergaard Clem,
Aye.
Councilmember Hamasu,
Yes.
so the vote for fiscal 2026 at a above the line number of 6% passes unanimously. Okay. Okay, next item in the agenda is all of the out years from fiscal 2027 through fiscal 31. And Dr. Kobe, where are we on those years?
Yeah, so for fiscal year 2027, you're at 4%. In fiscal year 2028, you're at 3.5, and 3.5 until the end of the budgetary period.
That's our current forecast.
Yes,
yeah,
as of May 29th.
I'm pretty comfortable with that too.
So if I put that in,
I would, if I were going to pick new numbers, I would start with 5 in 27, and then go down to 4.5, 4.5, or 3.5, or something like that. I would still head to 3.5, but I would start a little bit higher.
So
Well,
this
start
is,
higher than our current.
Yeah.
this is your current forecast.
And what would be your rationale for starting a little higher, Dr. Bonham?
Well, actually, because that's consistent with my forecast, but because I mean, fiscal 27 is still rebuilding boost in our book. That's so for us, the construction cycle, I think it peaks in 27 and starts to taper off. That's sort of, I mean, we're not really completely done with some of the federal spend, but we've seen the major growth effects, but I think we're still adding to rebuilding on Maui.
Makes sense.
So are the council's mean for construction for fiscal 27, is it 5.5, 5.05? Is that what we estimated?
I'm sorry, Chairman, I
Council
didn't catch that one.
mean for construction is 3.17 for fiscal 27. It's 5
that-
for fiscal 26.
But is the year, I
So
thought
when
you
I was
said
talking,
that-
I was talking about levels, right? The peak of activity is right. The peak of growth rates is earlier, but the peak of the level, right? You don't start. So in our forecast, we turn negative year over year growth rates in the out years. Right? We basically hit 0 in 29.
Isn't the columns 1 year?
Yes, they're shifted.
Yeah,
So I may have
yeah.
read it wrong.
Okay, because I have
Yeah.
5.05 for fiscal 2027 if we're just.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Okay. Vice Chair, what do you think about that? Because we're coming in at a adjusted number of 2.2 for fiscal year 2026.
Well, I'm okay. Well, we're talking about 27 and out, right?
Yes,
Yep.
yeah.
Okay, I'm okay with doing it a more gradual, like 5%, 4.5.
4, 3.5, 3.5.
Yeah. I would
Okay.
be okay with that. We can always change.
Yes,
We will.
We will, as we get,
yes.
That's good. Sounds good.
Yeah, I'm good with that too.
Okay. Councilmember Hayashi, any comments, thoughts?
Wait, do we have a motion?
I don't-
So moved.
it's your turn. I'll second.
Okay.
No comments
Councilmember
from me.
Hayashi, any comments or thoughts?
I think that makes sense.
Okay. Councilmember Hamasu?
Just one thought in regards to fiscal year 2027, is it anticipated? Well, you mentioned construction will remain strong for rebuilding, or that would be the peak, right? From a tourism perspective, could we potentially see the currency exchange with Asia to become a little more favorable, so you'd have a boost in maybe international travel?
That's that's our forecast.
Yeah.
It's not so much, I mean, we're not putting all of our eggs in the currency basket, but our forecast is that we see continued growth in Japanese visitors and other Asia. Really, I mean, really, once you get to fiscal 26, the US visitor recovery to Maui is it's not over, but really the US visitor recovery flattens out and it's all about the rest of the world.
And actually looking at the visitor statistics, the rest of the world have mostly come back. It's Japan where
Yeah.
we're really lagging.
Any further discussion of the out years from fiscal 2027 to fiscal 2021? Okay, if there's no further discussion, we'll take a vote. Vice Chair, I guess I want to make sure I got it right. So fiscal 2027 would be 5, 28 would be 4.5, 29 would be 4, and then it goes to 3.5 for the last 2 years. Is that the motion?
Prior to any legislative adjustments.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Is that the motion, Vice
Yes.
Chair, Dr. Bun- Okay, so the the motion that's been seconded is the above the line growth rate for fiscal 2027 will be 5%. For fiscal 28 will be 4.5%. Fiscal 2029 will be 4%. And fiscal 30 and 31 will be 3.5% each year. Okay, Vice Chair,
Aye.
Dr. Bonham.
Aye.
Councilmember Hayashi,
Aye.
Councilmember Lee,
Aye.
Councilmember Ostagon Clem,
Aye.
Councilmember Hamasu.
Aye.
So the vote carries unanimously. Okay. Okay, so the next is budget and finance, right? Budget.
Oh, aloha.
Okay.
Chair, council members, my name is Greg Hiratagoto. I am with the Department of Budget and Finance.
Yes.
We have provided you with our report of revised projections of general fund non-tax revenues, non-general fund tax, and non-tax revenues since the last May 29 meeting. The revenue estimates were prepared by our departments in July, were based on point-in-time assumptions made by program and department staff. Our report includes a summary of the significant changes, and I will highlight some of the more significant changes. Let me share my screen.
Okay.
So on table 2A, the big
Ooh, we
variance
can't
we
see
have
a
here-
screen.
sorry.
Yeah,
Are you able to see it? Share. Are you able to see it now?
it's coming up. Yes. It's.
Okay.
Are you able to make it a little bit larger?
Okay. Let me see. Is that better?
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Okay, so on table 2A, the big change was the revenues and use of money category. These are actually being updated with actual numbers since the fiscal year closed in June. The net increase is primarily due to an update of actual interest earned on funds invested from the general fund investment pool. And that was actually a $146 million increase.
Wow.
Well, that's because of the rising
Yeah,
interest.
they said it was actually due to the interest rate increase that occurred this past year because it was so low during the COVID pandemic times. The next thing I'd like to highlight is table 3A, which is the special tax revenues. So the variance that we want to highlight here is the transfer of general excise tax and transient accommodations tax to special the mass transit special fund. So there is a surcharge on top of the GET and the TAT that gets transferred for the mass transit special fund, which was set by the legislature previously. So those are these increases here. And actually for the TAT, it actually went down. I think you guys had discussed that a little earlier about how transient accommodations tax had gone down a bit.
Hmm.
And another thing that we had a little change on was the unemployment compensation tax, which employers pay into. So there was a bump up there for about 32 million in the past quarter. So that was the special tax revenues. And lastly, on table 5A, this would be the other than special fund non-tax revenues. The things we'd like to highlight is on the charges for current services. These numbers were actually adjusted in 24 and 25. These are actual refunds, rebates from our prescription drug plans and network and performance guarantee payments for our from EUTF. So those were up by about 85 million in FY24 and about 42 in 25, and they'll probably go up more because it's actually based on actual collections of refunds and rebates. And the last thing I'd like to point out is for non-revenue receipts, there was an adjustment because we are anticipating increases in our employer premium contributions for all the state workers and other public employees at the various counties and public agencies. So that was going up through fiscal years 25 to 31 by about 22 million each year. And that's all I have. Any questions?
Is that the hazard pay? The
No,
rebate?
no, this is actually the premium contributions that the employers have to contribute for all their employees. So it's like for your health insurance. The employer of the public employee has to contribute. So I guess the premiums are going up.
Hmm. Okay. Any motion to adopt BNF's report?
So moved.
Okay, any second?
I'll second.
Okay. Any further discussion or questions for Mr. Hirata Goto? Okay,
Thank you.
okay, thank you, Mr. Hirata
Thank you.
Goto.
Thank
We'll
you.
take a vote. Vice Chair Maynard,
Aye.
Dr. Bonham,
Yes.
Councilmember Hayashi,
Yes.
Councilmember Lee,
Aye.
Councilmember Ostergaard Clem,
Aye.
Councilmember Hamasu.
Aye.
Okay, so BNF's report is adopted unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Hirata Goto. We look forward to seeing you at future meetings.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Kobe, before we set the next meeting, can you show us the below the line numbers again? 'Cause I know we
Absolutely.
did
Mhm.
we projected above the line numbers.
1 second.
I know, I think we were 3.5 for the first year. Below the line.
Mhm. Can you see that?
Yes.
Could you make it a little bit bigger?
Mm,
My eyes are bad as I get
No
older.
problem.
So it's
Yelling at me. Hold on.
It's 3.5 for the first fiscal year, 2.2 for the next fiscal year. Then it goes to 3.5, 3.1, 3.1. And what is the last 2 years? Fiscal 30 and 3.9 and
1.9.
1.9 and 3.1. Okay. Wonder why. Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, the next meeting is gonna be a personal income forecast meeting, right, Dr. Kobe?
Correct.
And when's the report date?
November 5th.
November 5th. Okay. Typically, we have it the week before the election week. How's everyone's availability the last week of October?
Wednesday or Thursday works for me.
Yeah, Wednesday works for me.
Yeah, I think Wednesday's better for me too. Wednesday, October 30th. So how is everyone available Wednesday, October 30th at 2 p.m.?
Yeah.
Yes.
So the personal income forecast meeting will be Wednesday, October 30th at 2 p.m. Okay. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Great.
Um,
Thank
I
you.
don't-
Okay,
Thank
Just-
you.
thank you. And thank you, Dr. Colby and your staff.
And I'll
I-
get you the letter tomorrow.
Okay, okay, sounds
I,
good.
I just
Oh,
wanted to say,
Christie's trying to say something.
Seth, if you'd like us to have the forecast earlier, just put an earlier due date.
Okay.
Yeah.
We
we can
would
do
really,
that.
the September one, we're always pushing it because of it takes a lot of changes and
It's because you guys don't work on Labor Day.
yeah, that's part of
Ooh.
Just give us an earlier deadline, because I work off of whatever the deadline is.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you. We really appreciate your grace
Is
and
that
your
the one-
understanding.
That's the one you take into account the legislative changes, right? That's
Yeah.
the, yeah.
And it was a hard one, this one, because I was trying to figure out the best way to like share all these changes with you and the legislative things, and we were working with the team. So we really appreciate your grace.
Thank you. The
Well,
calculator
Thank you
was
for
very
all your hard
helpful.
work.
Yeah.
Seth, thank you for good explanations too. That
Yeah.
was very well laid out. It was really,
Yeah.
thank you. It was so helpful.
Great.
Thank you,
Thanks, everybody.
everyone.
Okay,
Alright.
thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.